This motion is not an attack upon the idea of a United Nations or even the United Nations. It's not an attack on the General Assembly of the United Nations. Still less is it an attack on Sir John's work, which was no doubt better at the UN than it was working for Mr. Tony Blair. It's not an attack on any agency of the United Nations. It's not an attack on any of the work that they do. It's very simple. That the Security Council of the United Nations is not worthy of your confidence. Now, I've debated many propositions in my long time in politics, but there's scarcely ever been a more clear-cut one. The Security Council has no moral or political basis for anyone's confidence here. The Security Council is in fact commanded by permanent members, 5 of them, whose sole claim to veto power is possession of nuclear weapons. There are no other qualifications that they have for this veto power, which effectively determines the course of the actions or inactions by the United Nations Security Council. They're not there because they're the best, or the richest, or the most democratic, or for any other reason. Merely that at the end of World War II, supplemented later by China, they had sufficient nuclear firepower to muscle their way into a permanent seat on the Security Council. This has led to such perverse decision-making that in 7 minutes it's impossible for me to adduce more than 2 of them. But I can adduce 2 of them which are unanswerable. The first is on the question of Israel-Palestine. Despite the existence of the United States veto exercised scores of times in defense of Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people, the Security Council nonetheless has on occasion instructed Israel to obey this or that aspect of international law. 2 of them in particular, Security Council Resolution 242 and 338, instructed Israel unanimously on behalf of the Security Council to withdraw from the land that it had occupied in the Six-Day War of 1967. It is now half a century more since these resolutions were passed, and they have never been implemented. Israel completely refuses to withdraw from that territory. Moreover, it has year by year paved those illegally occupied territories with illegal settlements, with illegal roads, and even has annexed a part of those occupied territories, meaning that it claims now that these territories around East Jerusalem are their own and subject to no international negotiation of any kind. Has the United Nations done anything about this flagrant defiance of its unanimous will? Well, it has in a way. It has in a way. It has stood by whilst members of the Security Council have flooded the miscreant state with money and weapons and political and diplomatic support. So far from the UN Security Council will being implemented, Israel is endlessly rewarded for its perpetual breach of United Nations Security Council resolutions. Iran was subject to, is still subject to a battery of international sanctions to dissuade it from developing nuclear weapons, whilst Israel is endlessly rewarded despite its possession of hundreds of nuclear weapons. How is this possible? Because of the Security Council veto exercised in most cases by the United States in defense of Israel, but oftentimes with Britain also doing the vetoing. Compare and contrast the situation in Iraq. Iraq was broken on the wheel of international sanctions on the basis that it possessed weapons of mass destruction, a claim later proved, now accepted, to have been wholly false. The Security Council presided over a regime of sanctions against the people of Iraq that massacred the innocent, the young, the sick, the old, the infirm. And the Security Council has completely failed. Does that mean I got 1 minute left? The Security Council has completely failed to rise to many other international challenges. The only way that we could have any confidence in the Security Council is if it were democratically constituted, if it were elected by all the countries in the world who are members of the United Nations. That process of democracy, of democratic election, would be the only basis in which I would come here to invite you to have any confidence in it whatsoever. Thank you. But with respect to our opponents, we are not required to give a better alternative. The motion is very clear that this House has no confidence in the Security Council. It would take, we wouldn't agree in any case, and it would take us much longer to construct for you what we should replace it by. All you're being asked to conclude here, and it's not difficult, is that no one can have any confidence in an organization which is structurally paralyzed by the fact that 5 now random countries, at least 3 of them are random, have the right of veto, and therefore can decide that something that everybody else in the world wants to happen will not happen. That's just barmy. And it would be barmy even if the 5 countries were the most important countries in the world. But the 3rd most populous country in the world doesn't have a sniff of being a permanent member of the Security Council. Neither does the 4th most populous country. Neither does the most important country in Europe, Germany, have a sniff of being on the Security Council. Neither does Japan, because the 5 people who've currently got this absolutely deal-breaking power will never agree to give it up. I don't want to sound like a self-hater, but what on earth is the case for Britain having a veto in the Security Council? It's absurd. We can't even pay our national electricity bills. We can't keep our pensioners warm in winter. We can't let our children go to university except by paralyzing them with 10 scores of thousands of pounds worth of debt. But we've got a nuclear bomb. So we have a permanent place on the Security Council. My last point, if I may, and it's with respect to the very gentle man in the front row. What a peculiar dichotomy he sought to draw. There's 3 quite good countries in the 5, he said, and 2 more questionable. I don't know, he's obviously not a history student. The United States of America has invaded 65 countries in the last 65 years. massacre millions and millions of people all over the world, but they're a quite good country because their attitude to gay rights happens to suit it. This is absurd. Absurd. And it's structurally absurd to give 5 people, ossified from 1945, the right to decide what happens in the world.
I'd like to thank both sides and both benches for coming down today, and I'd like to join me in saying thank you to our speakers one more time.